When my sister and I left the orphanage, all we got was 500 acres and an underground bunker. What we discovered there would change everything we thought we knew about our family, our past, and our future. If you've ever felt like you were given a puzzle with half the pieces missing or a burden that turned out to be a gift, then this story is for you. Stick with me and maybe consider subscribing, because we talk about real things here, and this is about as real as it gets. The door of the stat-issued sedan closed with a flat, institutional thud. It was the same sound that had punctuated every significant moment of my life for the past 10 years. The sound of a decision being made for me, arrival at the first group home, transfer to the second, departure for a court date, now this, the final closing. At 18, I was officially done, processed, emancipated. The sound was meant to signify freedom, but it felt more like an airlock cycling shut, ejecting me into a vacuum. On my lap, a cardboard box held the sum total of my worldly possessions. 3 changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book I'd read 100 times, a faded photograph of 2 smiling adults I couldn't remember, and a single, thick manila envelope that felt heavier than everything else combined. Beside me, my sister Maya, all of 10 years old, clutched a threadbare stuffed rabbit, her face pressed against the cool glass of the window. She wasn't looking back at the gray concrete building of the St. Jude's Home for Children. She was looking forward at the endless ribbon of highway, as if trying to see a future that I was supposed to be providing. The weight of her stare was heavier than the box, heavier than the envelope, heavier than the 10 years of structured, sterile emptiness we were leaving behind. The social worker, Ms. Albright, a woman with tired eyes and a permanently strained smile, adjusted her rear-view mirror. "Ready, Leo?" she asked, her voice attempting a cheerfulness that fell completely flat. I just nodded. Words felt like a currency I couldn't afford to spend. Ready for what? Ready to be the sole guardian of a 10-year-old girl when I was still a boy myself. Ready to take the mysterious unwanted inheritance that had triggered this abrupt departure. Ready to face a world that had so far only shown us its coldest shoulder. I wasn't ready for any of it, but I nodded anyway because that's what you did. You nodded, you complied, you moved forward. It was the first rule of survival. Maya's small hand found mine. Her fingers lacing through my own. Her grip was tight, a silent question and a statement all at once. "Are you scared?" "I'm here," I squeezed back, a wordless promise I had no idea how I would keep. "I know, I've got you." The car pulled onto the freeway, merging into a stream of anonymous cars, and the gray building shrank in the distance until it was just another concrete block in a world full of them. We were on our own. For the first time, truly and absolutely on our own. The silence in the car wasn't peaceful. It was loud, filled with the unspoken anxieties of a new beginning that felt terrifyingly like an end. Our first stop was not a new home, but an old office building downtown, the kind with a marble lobby that smelled of floor polish and regret. The name on the frosted glass door read Abernathy and Sons, attorneys at law. There was only one Abernathy, a man who looked as old as the leather-bound books lining his walls. He was tall and stooped with a face carved from granite and softened by a pair of kind, weary eyes. He didn't smile, but he didn't offer the plastic sympathy we were used to either. He just gestured for us to sit in the 2 stiff leather chairs opposite his enormous mahogany desk. Maya's feet didn't touch the floor. Miss Albright stood by the door, a final fading link to the system we were leaving. "Leo, Maya," Mr. Abernathy began, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder. "I was your grandfather's attorney and his friend. This was news to us. We'd been told our grandparents were long gone, just like our parents. Another detail lost in the fog of a past no one ever wanted to discuss." He slid a thick file across the desk. "As you know, upon your 18th birthday, Leo, The terms of your grandfather's will are to be executed. You are now the legal guardian of your sister Maya and the sole inheritor of his estate." He paused, letting the words settle. Estate. The word sounded grand, important. It conjured images of mansions and rolling green lawns. I glanced at Maya, who was watching a dust mote dance in a sunbeam, blissfully unaware of the legal jargon. Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat, pulling me back. "The estate," he continued, "consists of a single parcel of land, approximately 57 acres in a remote, unincorporated part of Clarion County. 500 acres. The number was staggering, incomprehensible. I'd spent my life in dorm rooms and cafeterias, spaces measured in square feet, not acres. A flicker of something wild and hopeful ignited in my chest, a place of our own, a real place. Then came the other shoe. It always drops. "The land itself is undeveloped," he said, choosing his words carefully. "Scrub and rock mostly. It has not been productive in decades, and unfortunately it comes with a significant liability." He pulled another document from the file. It was covered in red ink. "There are back taxes owed, a substantial amount. The county has placed a lien on the property. An auction is scheduled in 90 days. The flicker of hope died, smothered by the familiar weight of disappointment. Of course, it wasn't a gift. It was a debt, a trap. "There is, however, an offer," he said, his tone neutral. "A development firm, Sterling Terra Group, has been trying to acquire the surrounding parcels for years. They've made a standing offer to purchase your land. The offer is modest, but it would be enough to clear the tax debt and leave you with a small amount of starting capital. Roughly $20,000. $20,000. To me, it might as well have been $1 million. It was more money than I had ever imagined holding. Enough to get an apartment, to find a job, to give Maya a normal life. A real bedroom, a real school. It was the sensible choice, the only choice." "Why do they want it?" I asked, the question surprising me. My voice was horsaro. Mr. Abernathy shrugged, a slow, deliberate movement of his bony shoulders. "Access, I suppose, water rights. It's hard to say with these firms. They buy up vast tracts of land. Sometimes they develop. Sometimes they just sit on it." He slid a small flat key and a folded yellowed map across the desk. The key was old, made of tarnished brass. "Your grandfather specified that I give you this. He wanted you to see the land for yourself before you made any decision. See it. What was there to see? A piece of worthless dirt that was about to be repossessed. Still, the weight of the key in my palm felt significant. A final request from a man I never knew. "Miss Albright has arranged for your bus tickets," the lawyer said, standing up. The meeting was over. "My advice, son, take the offer. Give yourselves a clean start. There's nothing for you out there." His advice was sound. It was logical. It was what any sane person would do. But as I looked at the key, then at my sister, who was now quietly drawing on a notepad she'd brought, a stubborn, illogical thought took root in my mind. A story isn't over until you've read the last page, and my grandfather, for whatever reason, had wanted me to read this one. I closed my hand around the key. "We'll see the land," I said. The bus ride was a journey through descending layers of civilization. We started in the sprawling concrete heart of the city, a place of noise and frantic energy. Then came the suburbs with their neat lawns and identical houses, a vision of a life we'd only seen on television. After that, the strip malls and highways gave way to smaller towns, then to rolling farmland, and finally to something else entirely. The landscape grew rougher, the trees denser, the hills steeper. The sky seemed to get bigger, wider, a vast, indifferent canvas of pale blue. We were the only ones who stayed on the bus for the entire 6-hour journey. Other passengers got on and off. Families, students, workers, each moving within the orbit of their own lives. Maya and I were celestial bodies that had been knocked from our course, hurtling into the unknown. She slept for most of the trip, her head resting on my shoulder, the rhythmic jostling of the bus, a crude lullaby. I stayed awake, watching the world change outside the window. My thoughts a tangled mess of fear and a strange, unfamiliar excitement. The bus finally hissed to a stop at what could barely be called a station. It was a gravel patch on the side of a two-lane road marked by a single sun-bleached sign that read Pine Ridge. There was a gas station with a dusty convenience store and nothing else. The air smelled different here of pine needles, damp earth, and distance. A rusty Ford pickup truck was parked by the gas pumps. An old man with a face like a wrinkled apple sitting in the driver's seat. He watched us get off the bus, his gaze curious but not unfriendly. This was our prearranged ride, the final leg of the journey. His name was Earl, and he spoke in short, clipped sentences, his voice raspy from a lifetime of unfiltered cigarettes. "You're the kids for the old Callaway place," he stated, not asked as he threw our single box and 2 backpacks into the truck bed. We climbed into the cab, the vinyl seat cracked and cool against my legs. The Callaway place, that was our grandfather's name, a name that until yesterday had meant nothing to me. "Heard a developer sniffing around it," Earl said as he pulled onto the road, heading away from the gas station and deeper into the woods. "Want my opinion? Sell it. Nothing but trouble, that land, cursed some say, cursed." The word hung in the air of the cab thick as the dust kicked up by the tires. I asked him what he meant. He just grunted. Old man Callaway was a strange one. Kept to himself, built that place up, then just disappeared. Folks reckon he ran afoul of someone or just went mad from the quiet. He glanced at me. "This ain't a place for kids." The pavement soon ended, turning into a rutted dirt road that wound its way up into the hills. The trees closed in around us, their branches forming a canopy that dappled the path in shifting light and shadow. It was beautiful in a wild, intimidating way. After another 20 minutes of bouncing and rattling, Earl pulled the truck to a stop. "This is as far as I go," he said, pointing through the windshield. "Path up ahead is too washed out for the truck. Follow it about a half-mile. You'll see it." I paid him the cash Ms. Albright had given me for the fare. He took it without a word, his expression unreadable. "You got a way to call for help?" he asked as we got out. I held up the cheap burner phone I'd been given. It showed no signal. He just shook his head slowly. "Well, good luck to you." And with that, he reversed the truck in a multi-point turn and drove away, leaving us in a cloud of dust and an unnerving, profound silence. The only sounds were the wind rustling the leaves and the frantic beating of my own heart. I hoisted our box onto my shoulder, grabbed my backpack, and looked at Maya. Her eyes were wide, taking in the wall of green that surrounded us. "It's like a jungle," she whispered, a note of awe in her voice. "Come on," I said, forcing a confidence I didn't feel. "Let's go find our castle." We started up the washed-out path, 2 orphans and a cardboard box walking toward a curse. The path was less a path and more a suggestion. A faint trail of compacted earth that snaked through dense undergrowth. Half a mile felt like 5. Thorns snagged at our clothes, and the air grew thick and humid under the canopy of trees. I was sweating, the cardboard box digging painfully into my shoulder. Just as I was about to suggest we rest, the trees thinned, and we stepped into a clearing, and there it was, our inheritance, our estate. It was a shack, a small, dilapidated structure made of weathered gray wood, its roof sagging in the middle like a tired old horse. A single window was boarded up, and the door hung crookedly on one hinge. A stone chimney covered in moss listed to one side. This was it. This was the Callaway place. The last shred of hope I'd been clinging to evaporated, replaced by a cold, hollow feeling in the pit of my stomach. I had dragged my sister across the state for a pile of rotting wood. I set the box down with a thud. I couldn't look at Maya. I was too ashamed. I could feel her disappointment, her fear. I had promised her a castle, and I had brought her to a ruin. I waited for the tears for the "I want to go home." But she just walked slowly toward the shack, her footsteps silent on the pine needles carpeting the ground. She reached out and touched the rough, weathered wood of the wall. "It's quiet here," she said softly. I finally looked at her. She wasn't crying. She was just looking, observing, taking it all in. That was Maya. She saw things I didn't. She found the single dust mote in the intimidating lawyer's office, the quiet in the middle of a terrifying wilderness. I took a deep breath, pushing down the despair. We had to make a decision. There was no going back to the bus stop today. We had to at least spend the night. The door to the shack groaned in protest but opened. The inside was one small room, surprisingly dry but thick with the smell of dust, decay, and mice. A crude wooden table and a single chair stood in the center. A rusty wood burning stove was shoved into a corner by the chimney. In the other corner was a pile of old, mildewed blankets. It was bleak, but it was shelter. While Maya explored the single room with a child's curiosity, I started my own search, though I wasn't sure what I was looking for. A clue, a reason, something to explain why our grandfather would leave us this. I ran my hands along the walls, tapped on the floorboards. Most were solid, but near the back wall, under the pile of blankets, one board felt different. It was shorter than the others, and when I pressed on it, it gave slightly. My heart quickened. I pried at it with my fingers, then with the edge of the brass key from the lawyer. The wood splintered, but the board came loose. Underneath was a dark square cavity, and inside it a heavy olive drab metal box, the kind used by the military for ammunition. It was locked with a simple clasp. Next to it lay another key. This one modern and silver, attached to a small circular piece of metal with a strange symbol etched into it. A stylized bird with its wings spread. I lifted the metal box out. It was heavy, solid. I worked a clasp and with a click it sprang open. I expected documents, maybe a few sentimental items. What I saw made my breath catch in my throat. It was money. Stacks of it. $100 bills neatly bundled in paper bands. It wasn't $20,000. It was more, so much more. I didn't dare count it. My hands were shaking. This changed everything. But it wasn't the only thing in the box. Beneath the stacks of cash was a small hand-crank flashlight and a single folded piece of paper. I unfolded it. It was a hand-drawn map of the clearing with the shack marked as shed and about 50 FT behind it. An X was drawn next to the words "The Real House." The real house. I looked out the door of the shack toward the spot indicated on the map. It was just a tangle of overgrown bushes and a small rocky outcrop. Nothing that looked like a house. With the flashlight in hand and Maya closed behind me, I walked to the spot. The bushes were thick, but as I pushed them aside, I saw it. Not a house, but a door. A heavy steel plate door set horizontally into the ground, flush with the rock. It was painted to look like the surrounding stone, a masterful camouflage. In the center of the door was a keyhole, and next to it, a small recessed circle. The silver key from under the floorboard slid perfectly into the lock. I turned it. A heavy clunk echoed from within. Then I took the circular piece of metal attached to the key and pressed it into the recessed circle. There was a low hum, and then with a hiss of hydraulics, the massive steel door began to rise. It opened like a clamshell, revealing a set of steep concrete steps descending into absolute darkness. A wave of cold, stale air washed over us, smelling of earth, concrete, and something else. Something clean like ozone. This was it, the real house, an underground bunker. My grandfather hadn't just been a strange man who kept to himself. He had been a man with a secret, a very, very big secret. We stood at the precipice, staring down into the dark. This was no longer about a worthless piece of land or a tax debt. This was about uncovering the truth. I clicked on the hand-crank flashlight. its beam cutting a weak but steady path into the gloom. "Stay close," I whispered to Maya, and together we took the first step down. The descent felt like we were entering another world. The air grew colder with each step, the silence more profound. The concrete stairs were steep and narrow, enclosed in a smooth-walled shaft. After about 30 steps, we reached the bottom, standing in a small entryway. Another heavy steel door stood before us. There was no handle, just a small panel on the wall with a single large red button. I hesitated. Every instinct I'd honed in the system screamed at me to be cautious, to avoid the unknown. But we had come this far. I took a deep breath and pressed the button. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a low hum started, and with a series of loud, satisfying clicks, the locks on the door disengaged. A strip of light appeared along the top of the door, and then the whole bunker was flooded with a steady, humming, fluorescent glow. The power was on. The door slid silently into the wall, revealing what lay beyond. It wasn't a damp, cramped cellar. It was a home. A strange, sterile, windowless home, but a home nonetheless. We were in a long hallway. The air, though stale, was being moved by a quiet ventilation system. We walked down the hall, our footsteps echoing softly. There were doors on either side. The first one opened into a compact, efficient kitchen, complete with a stove, a refrigerator, and cupboards stocked with canned goods and freeze-dried meals. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, but was otherwise perfectly preserved. Another door revealed a bathroom with a working shower. Another, a bedroom with 2 neatly made bunks. At the end of the hall, we entered a larger room, a combination living area and study. There was a comfortable-looking couch, a bookshelf filled with titles on engineering, history, and cryptography, and a large desk. And on that desk, placed squarely in the center, was a vintage cassette tape recorder and a stack of tapes, each meticulously labeled in neat block handwriting. Next to them was a thick leather-bound journal. The first tape was labeled for Leo and Maya. "Play this first." My hands trembled as I picked it up. This was it, the voice from the past. The explanation. I looked at Maya, who was staring at the room with wide, unblinking eyes. I gestured for her to sit on the couch, and she did, curling into a small ball. I inserted the tape into the machine and pressed play. The speakers crackled, and then a voice filled the silent room. It was a man's voice, low and calm, but with an undercurrent of weariness. "Leo, Maya, if you are hearing this, then I am gone and you have found your way home. Home." The word hit me like a physical blow. "My name is Arthur Calloway. I am your grandfather." I sank onto the chair opposite the couch, my knees suddenly weak. I had to stop the tape. It was too much, but I couldn't. I had to know. I let it play. "I know you have questions," the voice continued. "I know you have likely spent your lives believing I abandoned you. That is the story I was forced to create. The truth is, I never left. I have been here under your feet all this time, protecting you. Protecting us from what? I did not work in insurance, as the official records state. For 30 years, I was a cryptographer for a quiet branch of the government. My job was to find patterns in chaos, to listen to the world's secret conversations. Most of it was noise. But one day I found a signal, a pattern. It wasn't foreign chatter. It was domestic. It was a group of very powerful men, titans of finance and industry, using a protected government network to orchestrate a massive fraud, manipulating markets, bankrupting companies, and ruining thousands of lives, all for their own enrichment. They were a shadow government accountable to no one. The faceless corporation, sterling terror, Abernathy had mentioned. It had to be them. I took my findings to my superior. He told me to drop it. He warned me that these men were untouchable, but I had the proof. I had their names, their accounts, their plans. I made a copy of everything. That was my mistake. They found out the day I was supposed to meet with a journalist. Your parents, they died in a car accident. The police called it a tragic accident, brake failure. But I knew it was a message to me. They were showing me they could get to anyone, they could get to you. I looked at Maya. Her face was pale. The story of our parents' death had always been a simple, tragic fact. Now it was a murder. I couldn't go to the authorities because the authorities were compromised. I couldn't run because they would find me, so I disappeared. I used my knowledge of the system to erase myself. I staged a boating accident, became legally dead, and I came here to this land that has been in our family for generations. And I built this place, a sanctuary, a fortress. I put you into the state system because it was the one place they would never look for you. Anonymous, lost in the bureaucracy. It was the cruelest, most painful decision of my life. To know you were so close, growing up without family while I was here, unable to reach out. Every day has been a torment, but it kept you safe. The tape hissed for a moment. I could hear him take a shaky breath. This bunker, this land, it is your birthright, but it is also a weapon. The choice of what to do with it is now yours. I am so sorry, my children, for everything. The tape clicked off, leaving a silence that was heavier and more terrifying than any I had ever known. Our whole lives, the entire foundation of our identities had been a lie. We weren't abandoned. We were protected. We weren't nameless orphans. We were Callaways. And we had just inherited not just a piece of land, but a war. The silence that followed my grandfather's recording was a living thing. It filled the bunker, pressing in on us, thick with the ghosts of unspoken words and lost years. I stared at the tape player, at the motionless spools, as if I could will it to say more, to explain how a grandfather's love could feel so much like abandonment. Maya hadn't moved from the couch. She was looking at me, her expression unreadable, her child's mind trying to process a reality that was fracturing my own. So, she said, her voice small but steady, our parents didn't just crash. I shook my head, a slow, heavy movement. No, it doesn't sound like it. And Grandpa, he was here. Yes, I whispered. He was here the whole time. I expected her to be angry. I was angry. A furious, helpless rage was boiling up inside me, directed at the faceless men who had stolen our family, at the system that had been our cage, and even at the ghost of the man on the tape. The grandfather who had made an impossible choice. But Maya wasn't angry. She slid off the couch and walked over to the desk. She gently touched the leather-bound journal. He was protecting us, she said, not as a question, but as a fact she had already accepted. Her simple, profound acceptance was a dam breaking inside me. I stood up, turned away from her, and walked over to the bookshelf, pretending to examine the titles. But the words were just a blur. The truth was, I couldn't let her see me cry. I was the adult. I was the one who was supposed to be strong, but the weight of it all, the murders, the conspiracy, the sacrifice, was crushing. I gripped the edge of a shelf, my knuckles white, and squeezed my eyes shut. I cried for the parents I never got to know. I cried for the grandfather who lived a lonely life in a concrete box, just miles from where we were sleeping in sterile dormitories. I cried for the childhood we had lost. For the 10 years of believing we were unwanted, disposable. And I cried because, for the first time, I understood that the hole in my life wasn't from a lack of love, but from a love so fierce, it had chosen to be cruel in order to be kind. A small hand slipped into mine. I looked down. Maya was standing beside me, her head tilted, her eyes full of a wisdom that no 10-year-old should possess. She didn't say anything. She just stood there holding my hand, a silent, solid anchor in the swirling chaos of my emotions. After a few moments, I wiped my eyes on my sleeve and took a shaky breath. "Okay," I said. "Okay." The emotional storm passed, leaving behind a strange, cold clarity. Anger and grief were luxuries. We had decisions to make. My grandfather had said this place was a weapon. I needed to see the rest of it. I found a journal on the desk. The first page was a continuation of his message. Leo, the money in the shed is for your immediate needs. It's clean, untraceable enough to start over anywhere you want. It is your easiest path to safety. You and Maya can disappear. Live a normal life. No one will ever find you. That is one choice. I thought of the cash in the metal box. 20,000. The lawyer had said it looked like 10 times that at least. A get-out-of-jail-free card for life. But there is another choice, the journal continued. The harder path. In the northmost room of this facility, you will find the rest of your inheritance. Use the same key from the shed. What you find there can either be your salvation or your tomb. The decision to open that door must be yours alone. The northmost room. I looked down the main hallway. There was one more door at the far end, one we hadn't tried. It was different from the others, made of reinforced steel with a high security lock. The silver key. The key from under the floorboard in the shed. It wasn't just for the bunker's main entrance. What is it? Maya asked, seeing the look on my face. It's another room, I said. He left us a choice. We walked to the door together. The air around it felt colder, heavier. This was the heart of the secret. I put the key in the lock. It turned with a smooth, precise click. I paused, my hand on the handle. I thought about the lawyer's advice. Take the offer. Give yourselves a clean start. I thought about the money in the box. A simple, straightforward escape. We could walk out of here, take the cash, sell the land to the very people who had destroyed our family and never look back. We could be safe, anonymous, normal. Was that what my grandfather would want for us to run? Or had he left us this key, hoping we would do something else, hoping we would finish what he started? I looked at Maya. She wasn't scared. She was watching me, her expression one of complete trust. In that moment, she wasn't the burden I had to protect. She was my conscience. I turned the handle and pulled the door open. The room was a small, climate-controlled vault, and it wasn't empty. One wall was lined with shelves, and on those shelves were dozens of sealed fireproof cases. Another wall was covered in corkboard filled with a spiderweb of names. Photographs and connecting lines of red yarn. It was a conspiracy board, a map of the enemy. But the most shocking thing was the third wall. It was stacked from floor to ceiling with cash. Not bundles, bricks. Shrink-wrapped bricks of $100 bills. It was an obscene amount of money, millions. And next to it on a small metal table sat a laptop computer and a single hard drive. A note beside it read, "This is everything. Their entire shadow ledger, the proof. The money is their weapon. Now it can be yours. They want this land because they suspect the proof is here. Sterling Terra Group is their creation. Buying this land isn't about development. It's about burying their sins forever." The choice was no longer abstract. It was right here in this room. Run with the money or stay and fight with the truth. The weight of that decision felt like the entire mountain above us pressing down on my shoulders. The sight of that room, the evidence, the web of conspiracy, the sheer staggering volume of money should have been overwhelming, and it was. But it was also clarifying. It was like finally seeing the full picture after staring at a single confusing piece for years. The questions that had haunted my life, why us? Why were we alone? Were answered. The enemy had a face, a name. Sterling Terra Group. The company that wanted to buy our land to pay us off with a pittance was them. They weren't just trying to acquire a property. They were trying to erase a history. My grandfather's history, our history. I stood there for a long time just breathing in the cool, dry air of the vault. The money was a siren song whispering of an easy life. A new car, a nice house somewhere far away. The best schools for Maya, a future free from struggle. Everything I had ever wanted to give her. We could take it. We could disappear. It was probably what my grandfather had intended as the primary option, a final gift of safety. But my eyes kept being drawn back to the corkboard, to the faces of the men pinned there, to the red yarn connecting them like arteries in a diseased heart. And I looked at the hard drive, the proof. My grandfather hadn't spent 30 years of his life in hiding, hadn't sacrificed his family and his freedom just for us to take the money and run. This bunker wasn't just a shelter. It was an armory. The evidence was the ammunition. The money was the fuel. He hadn't left us a choice between safety and danger. He had left us a choice between honoring his sacrifice or letting his enemies win. He had left us a choice between being victims or being fighters. I turned to Maya. She was looking at the wall of money, her eyes wide. "That's a lot of money," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Yeah," I said, "it is. Is it ours?" "Some of it," I said, thinking of the box in the shed. The rest is complicated." I knelt down so I was at her eye level. This was too much for a 10-year-old, I knew that. But she wasn't just any 10-year-old. She was a survivor. She was my partner in this. "Maya," I began, my voice heavy. "Grandpa gave us two paths. We can take the money and go. Find a nice place to live far away from here. Forget all this ever happened. We'd be safe." Her brow furrowed. "But the bad men would get away with it," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, the simple, damning logic of a child's sense of justice. She understood it better than I did. "Yes," I said, "they would. And they'd get this place, Grandpa's house." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, her gaze drifting from the money to the hard drive on the table. She reached out and touched its cool plastic casing. "Grandpa was brave," she said softly. "He fought them." She looked back at me, her dark eyes searching mine. "We have to be brave too, right?" And there it was. The choice made not by me, the 18-year-old adult, but by a 10-year-old girl who had more courage in her little finger than I had in my entire body. All my fear, my doubt, my temptation to run, it all just melted away, replaced by a fierce, burning resolve. She was right. We had to be brave. We had to fight for our parents, for our grandfather, for ourselves. "You're right," I said, a real smile touching my lips for the first time in what felt like a decade. "We have to be brave." My decision was made, solid as the rock around us. We would not run, we would not sell, we would not hide. We would use this fortress, this inheritance to finish the war our grandfather had started. I stood up, a new energy coursing through me. I knew what I had to do first. Back in the main room, I found what I was looking for. A satellite phone stored in a shielded case with its own power pack. It was old, bulky, but the power indicator glowed green. I took it outside into the fading daylight of the clearing. I needed a signal, and I needed to make the most important phone call of my life. After a few minutes of searching, I found a spot on the rocky outcrop where two bars appeared on the tiny screen. I took a deep breath and dialed the number on the business card Mr. Abernathy had given me. It rang 3 times and then his gruff voice answered. "Abernathy." "Mr. Abernathy," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "It's Leo Calloway." "Leo," he sounded surprised. "Have you made a decision about the Sterling Terra offer? I can have the paperwork drawn up tomorrow morning." "Yes, I've made a decision," I said, looking over at the camouflaged steel door of the bunker, our hidden kingdom. "I'm rejecting the offer." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Son," he said, his voice laced with paternal disappointment, "I advised you against this. That land is a liability. In 90 days, the county will seize it, and you and your sister will have nothing." "The land isn't the liability you think it is, sir," I said. "And it's not the inheritance. Not the real one, anyway." Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear him trying to figure me out. "What are you talking about?" "I need you to come out here, Mr. Abernathy," I said. "There's something you need to see. Something my grandfather left for me, for us. It changes everything." "Leo, it's a 6-hour drive." "I can't just Sterling Terra Group," I interrupted, using the name like a weapon. "Why do they really want this land? Did you ever ask yourself that?" The line went dead silent. I had his attention. "I'm at the property," I said. I'll meet you at the main road tomorrow noon. Come alone." I didn't wait for a response. I ended the call. The first shot had been fired. There was no turning back now. The next morning the world felt different, sharper. The light filtering through the trees seemed brighter, the air cleaner. Or maybe it was just me. For the first time in my life, I had a purpose that was my own, not one assigned to me by a caseworker or a group home schedule. Maya and I ate a breakfast of canned peaches and granola bars from the bunker's pantry, sitting at the small table in the shed. It felt strangely domestic, normal even, despite the bizarre circumstances. We were a family having a meal in our home. After we ate, I left Maya with the hand-crank flashlight and one of my grandfather's books on birds safely inside the bunker. I told her to lock the main door from the inside and not to open it for anyone but me. She just nodded, her face serious. She understood the stakes. I walked the half-mile back down the path to the dirt road, and from there another 2 miles to the paved road where Earl had dropped us off. I sat on a fallen log by the side of the road to wait, the satellite phone in my pocket. Noon came and went. 1002. A knot of doubt began to form in my stomach. What if he didn't come? What if he thought I was a crazy, grieving kid and had just dismissed my call? What if he had called Sterling Terror instead? I was alone out here, a teenager against a powerful corporation. The thought was terrifying. Just as I was about to give up hope, a dark sedan appeared, driving slowly down the road. It pulled over a few yards away from me. The door opened and Mr. Abernathy got out. He looked out of place in his dark suit against the backdrop of the wilderness, like a crow in a field of sparrows. His expression was a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. "Leo," he said, his tone flat, "you said you had something to show me. This had better not be a waste of my time." "It's not," I said, turning and starting back toward the dirt road. "Follow me, we have to walk from here." He hesitated for a moment, looking at his polished leather shoes and the muddy path ahead, then sighed and followed me. The walk was silent. I could hear his labored breathing behind me as we navigated the overgrown trail. When we finally reached the clearing, he stopped and stared at the dilapidated shed. "This is it?" he asked, an undisguised note of pity in his voice. "This is what you refused $20,000 for." "That's not it," I said, walking past the shed toward the rocky outcrop. "This is," I pushed aside the bushes, revealing the camouflaged steel door. Abernathy's eyes widened slightly. He was a man not easily impressed, but this was clearly not what he was expecting. I used the key and the metal disc, and with its familiar hum and hiss, the bunker door opened. I gestured for him to go first. He peered down into the darkness, then looked at me, 100 questions in his eyes. He cautiously descended the stairs. I followed him, closing the heavy door behind us. It sealed with a heavy final thunk, plunging us into darkness for a moment before I hit the button, and the lights hummed to life. I led him through the bunker, room by room. He said nothing, his sharp lawyer's eyes taking in every detail. The stocked kitchen, the ventilation system, the bookshelf of technical manuals. His skepticism was slowly being replaced by a look of sheer astonishment. Finally, I led him to the northmost room, the vault. I unlocked it and pushed the door open. He stepped inside and just stopped. He stared at the conspiracy board, at the shelves of evidence, and at the wall of money. His jaw, which I had thought incapable of anything but a grim line, actually dropped. He walked over to the stacks of cash, touched one of the shrink-wrapped bricks as if to confirm it was real. He turned to the corkboard, his eyes scanning the names and faces, some of which he clearly recognized. Then he saw the laptop and the hard drive. "My God," he whispered, the sound swallowed by the insulated room. "What is all this?" "It's my grandfather's life's work," I said. "It's the truth." I spent the next hour explaining everything. I played him the first few minutes of the tape. I showed him the journal. I told him about Sterling Terra Group and their connection to the men on the board. He listened without interruption, his face a mask of intense concentration. When I was finished, he sank onto the small stool by the table, looking overwhelmed. "Arthur," he said, more to himself than to me, "you magnificent, crazy bastard, you actually did it." He looked at me, and for the first time he wasn't looking at a troubled kid. He was looking at me as an equal, as a client, as a Callaway. "Do you have any idea what this is?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. "This isn't just evidence of fraud. This is sedition. This is a criminal conspiracy at the highest levels. This hard drive, this could bring down an empire." The fear I had seen in his eyes was gone, replaced by the steely glint of a fighter. He was a lawyer again, a damn good one. "They won't just let you walk away with this, Leo," he said. "Now that you've rejected their offer, they'll know something is wrong. They'll come for this land and they will not be gentle. The tax auction is their legal avenue, but they won't stop there." "I know," I said. "That's why I called you." He stood up, pacing the small room. He was energized, alive. The dusty old lawyer was gone. In his place was a general planning a campaign. "Okay." He said, "Okay, first we file an injunction to stop the auction, citing a dispute of ownership and the discovery of new assets. That will buy us time. Second, we can't go to the FBI or the DOJ, not until we know who we can trust. Your grandfather was right about that. We need a different route, a whistleblower lawsuit filed under seal. We use the evidence to force a federal investigation, but on our terms," he pointed to the wall of money. "And we use this. We hire the best forensic accountants, the best data security firms, the best investigators. We use their own weapon against them." He stopped pacing and looked at me, his expression deadly serious. "This will be a war, Leo. It will be long and it will be ugly. Your life and your sister's life will be at risk. Are you sure you want to do this? You can still walk away. Take the money in the shed and go. I will never speak a word of this to anyone." He was giving me one last out, but my resolve was absolute. I thought of my sister safe in the other room. I thought of my grandfather's lonely vigil. "I'm not walking away," I said. "This is my home. We're going to defend it." Abernathy nodded slowly, a grim smile on his face. "Good," he said. "Then let's go to war." The consequences of that decision were immediate and jarring. Our lives, which had just found a strange new rhythm, were thrown into a whirlwind. Mr. Abernathy left that evening, taking the hard drive and one of the fireproof cases of documents with him. He promised to be in touch within 48 hours. The bunker, which had felt like a secret sanctuary, now felt like a fortress, preparing for a siege. The next few weeks were a blur of legal maneuvers and escalating tension. Abernathy was true to his word. He filed the injunction, and a small-town judge, likely bewildered by the high-powered lawyers suddenly appearing in his courtroom, granted a temporary stay on the tax auction. It was our first small victory, but the enemy pushed back. We started receiving official-looking letters from Sterling Terra's legal team. They were polite, professional, but the message was clear. They increased their offer for the land. Then they threatened legal action for frivolous obstruction. And finally, they sent a surveyor to the edge of the property, a clear act of intimidation. We watched him from the tree-line, a man in a bright orange vest taking measurements, a scout for an invading army. The real change, however, was in our day-to-day existence. On Abernathy's advice, we were no longer to leave the property. He arranged for supplies to be delivered by a trusted contact, Earl, the gruff pickup driver who, for a hefty price, would leave boxes of groceries and necessities at the end of the dirt path once a week. He never asked questions, his face a mask of profitable indifference. We were isolated, but we weren't alone. Abernathy had assembled a small, dedicated team. He used a portion of my grandfather's money to hire a retired FBI financial crimes investigator and a young, brilliant cybersecurity expert. They worked out of a secure office Abernathy had rented, poring over the data on the hard drive, corroborating my grandfather's findings and building an ironclad case. Our communication was almost entirely through the satellite phone. The calls were brief, coded. He never used names. The investor was the investigator. The programmer was the cyber expert. Sterling terror was simply the opposition. It felt like we were living in one of the spy novels from my grandfather's shelf. But this was real. The pressure was immense. Some days the paranoia was suffocating. Every sound in the woods, every plane that flew overhead felt like a threat. I found myself obsessively checking the perimeter, walking the half-mile trail a dozen times a day, looking for any sign of intrusion. I was 18, playing soldier in a war I barely understood. But then I would go back into the bunker and I would see Maya. She had adapted to our strange new life with a resilience that shamed my anxiety. She had claimed the bunk bedroom as her kingdom, decorating the walls with drawings she made on the back of old printer paper from the study. She spent hours reading the books from the shelf, her world expanding even as ours was physically shrinking. She was my reason, my anchor. She reminded me what we were fighting for. One evening a call came from Abernathy. His voice was different, tense. "They know," he said without preamble, "the opposition. They know we have the ledger. We've been getting feelers through back channels, not threats, offers. They want to make a deal." "What kind of deal?" I asked, my stomach tightening. "They'll drop the claim on the land. They'll pay the back taxes. They'll give you a settlement, a very, very large one, enough to make you and your sister wealthy for the rest of your lives. And in return, we give them the hard drive, all copies, and we sign a non-disclosure agreement so absolute it would outlive our grandchildren. The lawsuit disappears. The investigation stops. It all goes away. They want to buy our silence." I said, "Yes," he said. "It's the easy way out, Leo. No risk, no fight. You win in a way. You get the land, you get the money. You and Maya are safe and rich forever." It was the same choice as before, just bigger, shinier, more tempting. The ultimate test. "What do you think we should do?" I asked him. There was a long pause on the line. "My job is to present you with the options, Leo," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "My personal opinion is irrelevant. This is your grandfather's legacy. It's your choice." I looked around the concrete room at the hum of the ventilator, at the steady fluorescent lights. This place was built on a principle. It was built on the idea that some things weren't for sale. "Tell them no," I said, my voice clear and firm. "Tell them we'll see them in court." Abernathy was silent for a moment, and then I heard him let out a long, slow breath. It was a sound of relief. "I was hoping you'd say that," he said. "Get ready, son. They're not going to ask nicely again." The months that followed were a slow, grinding siege. The legal battle raged in courtrooms hundreds of miles away, a war of motions, depositions, and sealed documents. On the ground at the Callaway place, it was a war of nerves. Sterling terror, having failed to buy our silence, escalated their campaign of intimidation. Low-flying helicopters began to appear, circling our property for hours at a time, their thumping blades a constant, unnerving presence. Unmarked vehicles would park for days at the end of the public road, men with binoculars watching the terrain. They never set foot on our land. Abernathy's injunctions were holding, but they were making their presence known. They were trying to break us, to make us feel surrounded, helpless. In some ways it worked. The fear was a constant companion, a cold knot in my stomach, but the bunker was our shield. Down there, the world and its threats disappeared. The thud of helicopter blades faded. The silence was absolute. It was our sanctuary, our fortress, and slowly it was becoming our home. We developed a routine. Mornings were for chores. I would make the trek to our supply drop point while Maya would tidy our living space. Afternoons were for school. Using the textbooks from the shelves and educational websites I could access on the bunker's surprisingly fast satellite internet, I did my best to homeschool her. We studied math, history, science. Her favorite was biology. She started a journal documenting the plants and animals she saw in the clearing, her drawings becoming more detailed and confident. I was learning, too. At night, after Maya was asleep, I would sit at my grandfather's desk and study the files Abernathy had left me. Simplified legal documents, summaries of the investigation. I was learning about shell corporations, about money laundering, about the complex machine of corruption we were fighting against. I was no longer just a scared kid. I was becoming a part of the fight. The land itself began to change, or rather our relationship to it did. It was no longer a worthless patch of scrub. It was our territory, our kingdom. With some of the cash from the shed, I had Earl deliver tools, an axe, a saw, shovels, and seeds. I started clearing the dense undergrowth around the shed, expanding our clearing. I repaired the shack's roof and door, turning it into a proper workshop. Maya and I tilled a small patch of earth and planted a garden. We planted tomatoes, squash, beans, potatoes. It was backbreaking work, but with every weed I pulled, with every seed I planted, I felt like I was putting down roots, both literally and figuratively. This wasn't just my grandfather's land anymore. It was ours. One afternoon, as we were watering our fledgling garden, Maya pointed to the top of the ridge that overlooked our clearing. "What if we built a house there?" she asked. "A real one with windows." I looked up at the spot. It had a perfect view of the entire valley. You could see for miles. "Maybe one day," I said, "when this is all over." "I want a blue door," she said definitively. The thought of it, a real house with windows and a blue door, a place not for hiding but for living, became a beacon of hope. It was the future we were fighting for. The turning point came late one evening. A call from Abernathy, his voice electric with excitement. "We got him," he said, "one of their inside accountants. He's ready to flip." The investigator found him, squeezed him, and he broke. "He's agreed to testify in exchange for immunity." "This is it, Leo. This is the smoking gun. It corroborates everything on the hard drive." "They're finished." A wave of relief so powerful it made me dizzy washed over me. "It's over." "Not yet, but the endgame has begun. It's going to get very public very soon. I need you and Maya to be prepared for that." He was right. A week later, the story broke. A major newspaper ran a front page expose based on leaks from our lawsuit. The names, the numbers, the conspiracy. It was a national scandal. News vans started to appear alongside the unmarked cars at the end of our road. The siege was no longer silent and menacing. It was loud and chaotic, but we were safe in our bunker, watching the storm unfold on the news. The men on my grandfather's corkboard, men who had seemed untouchable, were suddenly being investigated, subpoenaed, arrested. Sterling Terror Group imploded overnight, its stock plummeting, its executives resigning in disgrace. We had won. The war was over. In the aftermath, the silence that returned to the land was different. It wasn't the menacing silence of the siege or the sterile silence of the bunker. It was a peaceful, earned silence. The news vans and the unmarked cars disappeared. The helicopters were gone. It was just us, the wind in the pines and the vast, quiet sky. The legal proceedings dragged on for another year, a slow, methodical dismantling of a criminal empire. We were shielded from the worst of it by Abernathy, who handled everything. The final settlement was staggering. The government seized the illicit assets of the conspirators, and as the original whistleblowers, a significant portion was awarded to us by the court. It was a fortune that made the money in the bunker look like pocket change. But by the time it came, the money felt like an afterthought. We had already found our treasure, the land, our home. We stayed. With a small fraction of the settlement money, I hired a local architect and a construction crew headed by a man who had known Earl for 50 years. We built a house on the ridge right where Maya had pointed. It wasn't a mansion. It was a modest, sturdy house made of wood and stone designed to blend in with the landscape. It had large windows that flooded the rooms with light, and yes, it had a bright blue front door. The bunker was still there, of course. We didn't seal it. It was part of our story. We cleaned it, maintained the power and ventilation, and turned it into a library and a study, a monument to the man who had built it. My grandfather's desk remained, his journal and tape recorder sitting on it, a permanent reminder of the choice he gave us. Maya enrolled in the small public school in Pine Ridge. The transition was strange for her at first, but she was resilient. She made friends. She joined the science club. She was for the first time just a normal kid. I didn't go away to a fancy college. I enrolled in online courses from the state university right from the desk in our new living room. I started with business and economics, wanting to understand the world that had almost crushed us. But I soon found myself drawn to the law. Abernathy became my mentor, and I became his unlikely protégé. Our inheritance wasn't the land or the money or the bunker. It was the story. It was the knowledge that we came from a line of quiet fighters. It was the chance to reclaim our name and build a future on our own terms. Home, I learned, wasn't a place you were given. It was a place you fought for, a place you built from the ground up, a place you chose. It was the feeling of standing on the porch of our house, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of orange and purple with Maya beside me. The quiet of the evening broken only by the chirping of crickets. It was a peace that we had earned. We had taken the hardest path, and it had led us exactly where we were meant to be. This whole journey taught me something I think we all need to hear sometimes. It taught me that the things we inherit, the burdens, the debts, the painful histories are often not what they seem. Sometimes the heaviest box contains the greatest gift. The most desolate landscape holds the deepest secret. The most painful story holds the key to our freedom. For 10 years, I believed my story was about abandonment. I was wrong. My story was about protection. It was about a love so deep it was willing to be misunderstood. Reclaiming your own narrative, finding the truth buried beneath the official version of events, is the most powerful act of rebellion there is. It's how you turn a prison into a fortress and a curse into a legacy. We all have a story, and maybe yours, like mine, has a chapter you've been afraid to read, a door you've been afraid to open. Maybe you've been handed a piece of worthless land that is actually a kingdom in disguise. My hope in sharing this is that you'll find the courage to turn the key. If this story resonated with you, if it touched on something real in your own life, I hope you'll consider subscribing and joining the community we're building here. It's a place for people who understand that life isn't simple and that the best things are often the things we have to fight for. And I really want to hear from you. In the comments below, tell me what is the most important thing you've ever inherited. It doesn't have to be money or property. It could be a lesson, a value, a story, a choice. What was the inheritance that truly shaped who you are? I promise you, I will be reading every single one. Thank you for listening.